will be one of those welcome distractions. So I, like many of you, I think, are looking forward to that. So that'll be fun. But thanks again, and thanks to all of you for joining us today for what is an important and, as Stella mentioned, a timely discussion. We're certainly pleased that you've taken time to be with us today, including, actually, I think, one of our former colleagues, Anna. Some of you will remember Anna, and so we're happy to have her on here. I'm also pleased, as a part of this, to welcome one of our newest partners to the trade and the export ecosystem, Miss Natalie Scharf. You know, in St. Louis, we truly are blessed to have a robust group of experts and a set of resources from local to state to federal to elevate trade and to connect St. Louis globally and support businesses, your businesses, in your own global market pursuits. So Natalie joins this group as the new, or joins us here in St. Louis now, as the new director of the U.S. Export Assistance Center. And her job is providing oversight of trade promotion operations and agency metrics. Her duties include developing and maintaining appropriate contacts with the U.S. industry and U.S. government agencies, and along with international organizations like ourselves to help support international trade. She has, if you look at her bio, get a chance at some time, she has lived and worked all over the world, Morocco, Australia, and elsewhere, including, of interest, in particular note, Mexico, where she was working in the embassy in Mexico City right at the time when all of this, the U.S.-Mexico-Canadian Free Trade Agreement, was being negotiated. And so she is our newest addition to St. Louis, if you will. She's just literally getting moved in, having moved here and starting last week. But Natalie, we're certainly thrilled to have you here, and we all truly look forward to working with you. Maybe you could share a word or two from your end.
Certainly. Thank you, Tim, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Stella, as well. As you mentioned, I'm new here, just about a week in St. Louis, although I'm familiar with the Midwest, having lived in the Kansas City area for about 10 years. And as Tim mentioned, I am fresh in this position, but I was on the other side of the commercial service, on the foreign service side. So I was a commercial officer for about 8 years, and I did serve in Australia, Mexico, and just recently left Morocco. So I'm very excited to join now the domestic side of our operations, which is really just the counterpart of what we do overseas. And I'm looking forward to working with the team here to help Missouri companies export. Mexico is certainly one of the bright spots of my foreign service career because it's such a dynamic market. And while serving there, what I realized really is that it is a good market for just about any product or service that comes from the U.S. So we're looking forward to, of course, hearing about the Usmca from my colleague that I will present now. Meredith Bond is a colleague of mine, and she is the director of our Omaha commercial service. She's also our guru on free trade agreements and rules of origin, which, as many of you probably know, can get quite complex. So I'm thrilled to be here. I look forward to meeting many of you and working in partnership with the World Trade Center. And I will turn it over to Meredith.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. Thanks to the World Trade Center of St. Louis. Thank you to all of you joining today. In my experience, rules of origin are really at the heart of most of the questions we get related to free trade agreements. So I'm going to focus on that aspect. That's the part that lets you get your goods through duty-free if they qualify. So there's lots to get through. I'm going to go over these slides fairly quickly, but you'll have them so you can go over them a little more slowly as you need to. And we'll hold off on questions until the end, but you can, as I'm talking, if you think of something, type that into either the, let me see if I can bring up the presentation here. Oh, I'm sorry. Foamy, I'm wondering if you could take that back and open the presentation. I think you had preloaded it. Would that be the easiest way to do it? I think that is. So as you think of questions, and I'm sure you will think of many, we'll get to as many as we can afterwards. Please feel free to type that either in the chat box or the Q&A box, and our colleagues at the World Trade Center will kind of look through those, look for some common themes, and then feed those to me at the end. We'll get to as many as we can. If not, we will certainly be in touch with you afterwards. Thank you so much for loading that. That's very helpful. Okay, let's get started on understanding rules of origin. And if I could have control to move the slides, I think that's all I need. Or we could just go to the next slide, whichever is easier. Excellent. Now I've got it. All right, benefits of free trade agreements. As I mentioned, tariff elimination is probably the main thing that companies look to benefit from free trade agreements. It makes your products more competitive because they're going in without having to pay any extra tax. It gives you an advantage over third country producers who might not have an FTA with Canada or Mexico if you're shipping from the US. It also gives you the ability to bid on government procurement. It covers all kinds of other things like fair treatment for investors, can participate in product standards developments, a lot of other benefits, but as I said, mainly it's when companies really want to send their goods without having to pay the duty. All right. See if I can do next slide. Just a quick overview of where we have free trade agreements. We're going to focus on USMCA today, but if you know the rules of origin for USMCA, you're going to be in very good shape to take advantage of other free trade agreements that the US has in place. There are a lot of common themes as to how you apply the rules of origin. So this is just a quick slide. So you'll have the website where we have put all of our USMCA specific related materials, what you need to know on day one, which happened a few weeks ago. But in case you haven't read it yet, that's a good one to start with. It also has some really good fact sheets on particular changes for industries. If you're in the automotive industry, you definitely want to read through that. That probably had the biggest changes as far as an industry goes. A lot of the rest of it is going to seem very familiar if you already knew some of the rules of origin with Nafta. Very much of it, as far as that part of it, is the same kind of process to qualifying a good. So how do you get the benefit of this free trade agreement, USMCA? You have to make sure your product qualifies. So once you do that homework, you need to let your customer know that you have done it. It does qualify, and when they import it, they can make that claim, and they probably won't have to pay any extra tax on it when it comes through customs. So what is qualifying? Keep in mind, just because it's shipped from or made in the US, assembled in the US, doesn't automatically mean that it qualifies. There are very specific rules of origin, and we'll go over on how to look those up and go through them. They vary within USMCA. They vary from USMCA to other free trade agreements, but what they all have in common is you're proving some kind of value added content or work that you've put in within the US or within that small group of partner countries. So why must goods be qualified? This is to ensure that we keep all those great benefits that we spent all this time negotiating. Thanks, Natalie, for helping with that. We make sure that those benefits kind of stay within this happy little family we've created of USMCA, Canada, the US, and Mexico, and to prevent third-party country producers from just kind of passing their goods through and taking advantage of that. You've got to really prove that it is a product. So the main reason that this matters is that the burden of proof is on the exporter. It's claimed by the importer, but they're going to rely on the exporter for that information to show that that qualifies. You need to understand what you're declaring when you provide them that information, and you can be audited by those foreign customs authorities. If they don't think you're doing it quite the right way, or they don't necessarily believe, or they need to know more about your process to come to that conclusion, they can ask you for further information. What if you do all this homework and it doesn't qualify? You go through the exercise and there's just not enough to qualify that product. Can you still ship it? Of course you can, but your customer can't claim any benefit under USMCA if it doesn't actually qualify for the agreement, which brings up a good point. None of this is required. You'll have to make a determination at some point. Is it worth your time to do all of this research and homework? Are you going to save enough on the other side of it from that tariff benefit to actually do all of that work? Some companies, every once in a while, decide it's really not worth the time. Maybe they're not the manufacturer. They have thousands of items in their catalog. They can't track it down through their supply chain. It's just easier for them to pay the tariff, which might be fairly low, than to spend all the time and staff time doing this research. So again, keep in mind, it's all voluntary. It is not required. You do not have to qualify in order to sell to Canada or Mexico. The only time you need to do this work is if your importer is going to claim that reduced or eliminated benefit under MCA. So what are you going to need to actually do that? You're going to need to know your rule of origin. That is based on your HS number of your good, and then specifically within the FTA you're using. In this case, we're talking about USMCA. So once you have your HS number, you can look up your rule. You must have the harmonized system number, probably for most of your main components that go into your finished goods. So you'll build something like a bill of materials to take a look at everything that goes into your product. How is it classified? What is the unit value? You'll have to build out different parts of information depending on your rule, and we'll look through a couple examples. It definitely takes patience and time. I will very often get a phone call saying, hey, I just need to fill out this paperwork because I'm shipping to Mexico. And it is not a 2-minute conversation. It's not just, oh, put this in that box. This was the same under Nafta. Oh, what do I put in that box 7? There's really a lot more research that goes in behind it so that you can prove that you really did the homework and it qualifies. So just backing up a little bit, harmonized system classification, we're not going to go into it in detail, but it's incredibly important for USMCA and for any free trade agreement where you're trying to qualify your goods. You need to know the HS number of your finished product that you're trying to qualify. That allows you to look up your rule. You're probably going to need to know the HS classification of many of your component parts that go into that. So keep in mind, if those are incorrect, you might be using the wrong rule and your supporting documentation could be invalid. And that's anywhere along the line. So we're going to make a big assumption here that you have the correct HS classifications for your product. That's a big assumption. There are many classes you can take on HS classification. They're really interesting. There are general rules that apply. So I definitely encourage you to learn more about HS classification if that's not something you've studied before, but it's absolutely a keystone to making sure that all your free trade agreement research is correct. A few FTA concepts that you will see when you're looking at USMCA. Origin and origination are kind of two different things. We'll talk a little bit about customs, valuation, and the transaction value. That's going to be key under USMCA. And then substantial transformation and tariff shift. How we classify things says a lot about how processed those items are. So country of origin is kind of a broader concept. It's where a product was made or assembled or manufactured, when it became kind of what it is. So its country of origin could be the US, but it might not be originating under USMCA. That's when we know that it met its rule of origin. Originating is kind of a higher standard. You're proving through one method or another, and we'll talk about those methods, that there is value added production and components that come from within that group of countries that confer originating status on the good. Again, keep in mind, just because it's all brought together in the US and becomes what it is, doesn't necessarily mean that it is originating under the rules. You need to read the rule for that product and apply it to know. Transaction value, another really important concept. Very simply put, transaction value is the sales price. It is the total payment, excluding a few things that you see listed there. The price paid or payable, maybe you haven't been paid yet, that's okay, for the good. So more or less, in shorthand, it's the sales price. There's a little more to it, and there are some definitions on what it doesn't include. So you've got that. But for the most part, it refers to the sale price to that customer. And if you have different sales prices for different customers, you may need to run that formula each time. It may depend. So there are a few different ways to come up with appraised value. One of the things that USMCA provides for, and happens a lot with our trade for Mexico, is there are related parties. Sometimes there isn't actually a transaction, it's not a sale. Some companies are shipping parts to their sister company that's doing the manufacturing in Mexico or in Canada. So if there is no actual sale, these are some other ways that you can come up with what that transaction value, the appraised value of the good would be. So there's really two kinds of free trade agreements that we have. We are going to focus on the tariff shift kind, which is USMCA. Nafta was really the first one of this type, and Nafta does serve as a blueprint in rules of origin for USMCA. Most of our larger trading partners that we have FTAs with fall into that category. There is a different family of free trade agreements where it's not really specific rules for every product. It's more of a general 35% rule that applies to these countries. So keep that in mind. If you're very familiar with NAFTA and now USMCA, if you are shipping to Jordan, it's a slightly different group of rules. And again, on export.gov, we've got a lot of information on that where you can find it. But we're going to focus on USMCA and the tariff shift and regional value content type. There are a few different places you can find rules of origin. And depending on the situation, I would say for the most part, I often use the U.S. International Trade Commission publishes the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States every year. And that's really when you're importing into the U.S., what tariff do you pay coming into the U.S.? It's all the HS numbers and what, depending on the agreement that we have, what is the duty that's placed on those goods. But there is something called the General Notes chapter to the Harmonized Tariff Schedule. And the General Notes chapter has all of the rules of origin for all of our free trade agreements, which is kind of a handy way to download one PDF when it's updated every year and have all of the rules of origin for all of our FTAs. That's not so useful this year because USMCA is new. So I'll show you on the USTR website, the US Trade Representative website. That right now is the best place to get the USMCA information. But come January, when the new HTS is published by the International Trade Commission, I would download that General Notes chapter. I like to just have that as a PDF, and then I can search for a keyword or an HS code. It's nice to have it all in one document. But for USMCA, I would highly recommend going to the USTR website, and they have the final text, including Chapter 4, Rules of Origin, for USMCA. So you have a few options of how to do that. There is a third option. This is a really great tool actually for a lot of things. The International Trade Center, which is a joint agency of the WTO and the United Nations. It's a tool where you can plug in, I'm shipping from here to there. So it's not necessarily US trade agreement focused. You might be able to see what other trade agreements exist between any two countries. So that's a great one. It'll show you the rule of origin and which agreements are available to you. So that's another option that you might take a look at. So how do rules of origin work? Things might be as simple as it qualifies because it is wholly of. That is generally for commodities. If you have a manufactured good, it is probably not wholly of. Wholly of really means every molecule in that product, you can show exactly where in that territory it came from. So if you are exporting corn or coal, you can pretty much point to the ground where it came from. So wholly of is really reserved for commodities. Most of the products that are manufactured are going to qualify under these last two, either tariff shift, where we're comparing the HS classifications of the finished good to its component parts, or regional value content, which is where we're looking at, what percentage of that sales price is non-originating stuff. If it's small enough, then we'll be okay and we'll qualify. So we'll look through a few examples real quick to give you a good idea of that. So we call this tariff shift, and everybody calls it tariff shift. It would probably be better classified as, or better called, a tariff classification shift. You're really looking at the HS classification of the finished good, and then you're taking a look at the components that go into it, the materials that you use to make that finished good. So here's an example. That might be the easiest way to look at it for this California wine spritzer. So we are mixing, just two materials go in to make this wine spritzer, wine and fruit juice. So we know the HS classification of our finished good, the wine spritzer, is 2206. That's just the 4-digit level, but that's okay. That's enough for us to look up our rule. And you can see highlighted in yellow here, the Usmca rule for this product is a change to headings 2203 from 2207 from any other heading. So we only have two materials to worry about, the wine and the fruit juice. So let's look at the wine first. It's 2204. So it falls within that group that we needed to make a change from. If our wine comes from the US, doesn't have to be California. If our wine comes from the US, Canada, or Mexico, it doesn't need to make that change. It's already originating on its own. So it doesn't need to make that change. So that's good. We need to have a US, Canada, or Mexico wine going into this product. Otherwise, there's only one way to classify wine, and it gets classified as 2204. It's always going to fall within that group. So if we import wine from Argentina, it's going to be 2204. It's not qualifying on its own. So it's never going to make that change for us, and it would prevent us from making our wine spritzer USMCA qualifying. So that's something we need to keep an eye on our supply chain with and make sure we are using an originating wine. In our case, it's great. We buy it, from California, so we're okay. Fruit juice is our other material. It is classified in chapter 20. It's 2007. So it's even from a different chapter. So that means it's definitely a different heading. We could get that fruit juice from anywhere, and it will always make that change compared to our finished good, which is in chapter 22. So we have two materials. There's one we always have to worry about. And if it's not originating, we're just never going to be able to qualify under this rule. But the second ingredient, the fruit juice, because it makes that change, it will always make a change from chapter 20 to chapter 22. We can change our sources on that, and we won't have to worry about it. Another example, a slightly more complicated rule. It's a longer rule, as you can see. It's got two parts to it. This happens to be for hair clippers. The first part sounds very familiar. It talks about a change from a subheading to any other heading. But then that second part, you can see down in the A and the B at the bottom there, 60% where transaction value is used, or 50% where the net cost method is used. So it's possible that we might have to do some math. But the good news is, if you can see this or right here between the two, you only have to use one. And really, it's up to you, which would be the easier one for you to investigate, the tariff classification shift or looking at the regional value content. So it's actually having a longer rule gives you more options. It's actually better. So just kind of looking at the big picture for what does this rule mean? That A part is just like the wine spritzer that we looked at. We take these widgets that are classified in a certain way, and then we make a hair clipper, which we know is, a new product, and it's classified as 851020. So we might have to look at what all of the component parts that go into this hair clipper are and how they're classified. If they all make the required change from a different heading, then we're okay. We've qualified. We don't even have to look at that second part. But I'll let you in on a secret that parts of hair clippers are classified also as 8510. So if you have any imported parts that are very unique to these hair clippers, the tariff shift part might not work, and you'd have to move on to regional value content. But that's okay. You still have that option, and you can still look at that. So regional value content is a provision that makes sure the manufacturing operation is more than assembly. So if you're just importing these 8510 parts of shavers, sticking them together, they're saying that's not enough value added work to prove that you've added enough to qualify for USMCA. So they want to look at the regional value content. So to benefit from a free trade agreement, if you have to look at regional value content, it's showing that added value, and it's showing it as a percentage of dollars. When you're comparing the cost, not either the net cost of production or the sales price of that finished good, in this case, the electric shaver, to what's the value of those component parts that you do import. Are they significant? Are they most of the value of that shaver, or are they just a small part? And the rule will tell you what level you need to meet. So it's really encouraging you to source your supplies from within the US or from within that group of free trade agreement countries, in this case, Canada, Mexico, or the US. Here's the formula that you would use. I would say most of the time companies look at transaction value first. That's the one that uses your sales price in the calculation. Net cost, you're perfectly welcome to use that. And there are some products that require you to do net cost. Again, in the automotive sector, very often you're required to use net cost. And there's a definition down there at the bottom of what you can and can't include in that net cost. But I would say most of the time, companies are using transaction value, where you're comparing your sales price to, what is that value of the non-originating stuff you use to make your product. You will also see in other free trade agreements, I'll mention real quickly here, build up and build down. You won't see the same text that you see in USMCA, but I can tell you that the build down method that you'll see like in CAFTA or the Australia FTA, it's the same formula as the transaction value method in USMCA. So that'll come in handy. So as I said, in transaction value, you're looking at the sales price, and then you're comparing that to the value of non-originating materials. And that's anything that's imported from outside the US, Canada, or Mexico, in the case of USMCA, or items where you don't know the origin. If you can't prove that the origin is one of those three countries, you can't track down where it came from through your supply chain, you have to assume that it kind of goes into the non-originating value column when you do your calculation. The other thing to keep in mind is our free trade agreements aren't connected. So if you're trying to qualify a good for USMCA and maybe your component parts come from Australia, yes, we have a free trade agreement with Australia, but if they're Australian origin, that doesn't give you any credit towards USMCA. You can't kind of mix and match them. So here's another rule. Again, it's got the two parts, the tariff shift, and then it also has the regional value content. So let's take a look at this good as if we were going to do the regional value content. You would build something like this. So our product is this chair. We would have a bill of materials. We've got our selling price here. It's $400. These 7 things are the basics that go into our chair. So it's a few more items to make it than with our wine spritzer, but we know the HS numbers. We know the origin of some. We don't know the origin of all. And then what that unit cost is every time we make a chair. What's the value of the wood? How much of the fabric is in there? Where does it come from? So we've built up this bill of materials with all the critical information that we need to plug into that formula. So we know our total cost of materials is $229. But at some point, if we need it, we know our wood comes from Canada. That's originating. That's going to help us out. That's $150 that won't count against us. It will count in our favor because it's a UMCA originating thing. I often tell companies before you track down the origin maybe of all your materials, try to run a shortcut. You know your sales price. That's usually pretty easy to figure out. And you may know your total cost, your total of materials that you use. What's that value? And you can just plug it into the formula. Let's see how close you get to that required 60%. In this case, we know our sales price is $400. Our total cost of non-originating materials is $229. Ooh, I don't know why that doesn't match the 184. I'm sorry. I think my slide got messed up. But we only meet 42%. So we had to exceed 60. So we'll have to take a second look back at those goods. So this is where that wood on our bill of materials from Canada benefits us. We know that is originating. So we can take that out of our total price of materials. So that puts it down to 79 and we get 80%. So easily we've exceeded that 60%. So it qualifies under NAFTA, or not, sorry, under USMCA. It probably also qualified under NAFTA. This is just for you to look at when you have the handouts. CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, has put together a really nice comparison chart of all of our different free trade agreements and some common things they have in common, and then what might be different from one to the other. I don't think they've updated it for USMCA quite yet, but I'm sure that they will. But that's a useful resource for you to have a look at. So everything we've talked about now kind of follows the same bunch of steps. Again, HS numbers are a critical step one. You need to know your HS number for your product so that you can look up your rule of origin and figure out if it qualifies. The shortcut really is if you're able to use Tariff Shift, because then you don't have to really do any math. You're really just looking at the classification of things that are imported. So you've got to classify those component materials. And the ones that are imported or are unknown, do they make the shift? If not, go back to that vendor, make sure that you've got the origin correctly, and see if you can qualify it that way. If not, you might have to go to regional value content. So you've got a few more steps if you need to do regional value content. But again, it all starts with the right HS classification and figuring out what your rule is, analyzing your bill of materials, filling in all the blanks in that. What is it? Where is its origin? What is its HS classification? And what is its unit cost? Because eventually we're going to put that into a formula with the total value of the non-originating or unknown items and compare that to our sales price. Okay, so you've done all the hard work. Assuming you've done all the hard work and you have qualified your product, congratulations. Now you actually have to claim your FTA preference. As I said, the importer makes the claim when they clear it through customs in their country, but they are going to rely on you to provide them that backup information. So you do assume responsibility for all that data. All of the goods that originate and meet the specified rules of origin, you need to give them some kind of documentation. This used to be the NAFTA certificate of origin. USMCA does not call for a specific certificate. Because it doesn't, the US government is not going to publish any kind of document that you can use for that information. You can do it on your letterhead. I've already seen many, many knockoff type certificates. As long as you include the 9 data elements that USMCA calls for you to provide, you can pretty much put them in any format that you want. And that is also spelled out in the text of the agreement, what those 9 data elements are. So again, burden of proof is on you. The importer needs to have that information, but they're going to rely on you to give it to them, just as you probably rely on your suppliers for that information so that you can do your calculation. So they have the right, the customs authority of the other country has the right to verify that information. They might do that. Of course, they'll always start in writing, but if it's serious enough, they may actually want to visit you and look at your information and look at your production. It doesn't happen a lot, but it is possible and it is provided for under USMCA. So again, the documentation, there are no actual certificates of origin, and that is now true for all of our free trade agreements. None of them call for a specific format for that information. It will tell you what information you should include when you contact your buyer and provide that to them, but it will not have a specific format the way the old Nafta certificate of origin did. And I've written here, okay, USMCA, it is in Chapter 5, and it's in Annex 5A. That will spell out those minimum data elements. There are 9 of them, and they will look exactly like the Nafta certificate of origin did. So it's going to look very, very familiar to you if you're already familiar with having filled out the Nafta certificate of origin. And just one more note, that last item there, remember these are self-certifying documents. They are not the ones that you get a Chamber of Commerce to stamp and sign. These are just done by the company saying, yes, we've looked at our process and our goods qualify. Record keeping, you need to keep that for 5 years. That's what the agreement calls for. And that's kind of your entire process that you went through to qualify the goods. I think it's a good practice to keep contact names of where you got the information, both internal within the company and from suppliers, and a log sheet when it's reviewed. Especially if you're doing regional value content, your prices change, the prices for your inputs change. So if you're real close to whatever line is required, again, most of the time it's 60% with USMCA, and you're really close to that line, you're going to have to revisit that more often to make sure that you haven't gone the wrong way over that percentage line. Just a couple quick resources. Again, you'll have the presentation, so you can click on these links. On export.gov, our tariff tool, you can plug in for all the countries we have free trade agreements with. If you have your HS number, you can plug it in and see what that duty would be. Almost all of our free trade agreements now have been around long enough that everything that qualifies is pretty much going in duty-free now. Maybe not everything, but I would say most goods by now have been phased in if they weren't already duty-free on day one. And then we also have this free trade agreements help center, again, information on a lot of different countries where we have free trade agreements with, things on rules of origin, on what kind of documentation you might need to provide. So that's a good one to bookmark as well. So that's the overview of rules of origin. That's about the fastest I could possibly give you the overview and still be useful. I apologize if it was a little confusing because it was fast, but at least it's a start. Hopefully you're a little bit more familiar with it now. At this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Margaret Gottlieb. She's a senior trade specialist in our St. Louis office, and she can tell you about what they can do locally to work with you and a brief overview of how we do work with companies to help increase U.S. exports. So I'll turn it over to you, Margaret.
Well, thank you, Meredith. I am glad that everybody that could join this afternoon, and hopefully you will find this presentation helpful. As Meredith mentioned, there are many resources online that can help you with determining your origin status and with other kinds of things that you might need for the USMCA, and also with just learning about the U.S. Commercial Service. Having said that, let me tell you a little bit about our local office. If you could do the next slide, please. We are part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration, the U.S. Commercial Service. As you've already heard from our director, Natalie Scharf, she just started with us this week, and we are very lucky to have someone with her credentials to lead the rest of the trade specialists from here on in. We've been, all of us at the office have been acting, but we're glad that we have a permanent director in place at this time. Next slide, please. Then the rest of our staff, where there are 3 of us, and the slide that when you get this presentation, and if we can move it forward, there we go. There are 3 of us: Warren Anderson, myself, and Christy Wiggins. You have our cell phone numbers there. You have our email address is there. We are working and can help you not just with your USMCA things, but anything that has to do with exporting your US goods and services from the US to other countries. We're there to assist you. We work with over 80 countries on the overseas side, where our commercial specialists and directors work at the embassies and consulates to assist you in advocacy, in matchmaking, in market research, and with any kind of information that you might need to do a successful export. So we invite you to please give us a call or send us an email. We're using MS Teams. We can do face-to-face meetings that way. And we look forward to working with you. Thank you. And we'll turn it back over to Tim and Stella.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and thanks to Meredith as well for that great presentation. And as Margaret mentioned, we work very closely with the Department of Commerce. They're wonderful partners, so we do encourage you to reach out to them for their services. Thanks so much, Meredith. I think that was great information. I loved the concrete examples, particularly the wine and the hair clippers. I know those those two items are things that I've certainly used more of during these last few months during the pandemic. So very timely examples there. We do have a few questions, and this one will come as no surprise, I think. Can I use the 2020 NAFTA COO as supporting documentation for origination for the first USMCA certification since the time periods overlap? NAFTA ending on 12/30 and, of course, USMCA starting on July 1.
The technical answer is no. NAFTA doesn't exist anymore. And NAFTA doesn't end on December 30th, 2020. It might be a blanket period on that certificate that ends on December 30th, but NAFTA is gone. NAFTA is a different agreement and its rules don't exist anymore. It's better than, if it's your backup information for a product, it's better than nothing. You have something in writing, but I would strongly encourage you to get new blankets as often as you can. It is not the most useful backup anymore. It's better than nothing, but it does refer to something that doesn't exist anymore. It's not rock solid. Chances are it probably still qualifies. Chances are the rule may not have changed at all, and if anything, it's more generous, so that's good. But it was difficult putting it into practice in the middle of the year because a lot of companies do use those blanket agreements for the year and don't really look at it again. But in theory, you should be updating all of those. So I'm sorry to give a very unpleasant answer that creates a lot of extra work for you, but that is the technically correct answer on that one.
Great, thank you. Always best to have the correct information, whether it creates more work or not. Yeah. So another question, the onset of COVID has certainly disrupted global supply chains and increased the interest among companies to shorten the distance of product suppliers. How will USMCA impact this acceleration of changes to global supply chains?
That may be a bigger picture than my expertise allows for. But in general, USMCA was put in place to update all the good things about NAFTA and make them easier and more accessible. As you may know, there is a small business chapter, an SME chapter now. And one of the most important things that promises is the online publishing of information of all the rules, of how to ask for things, how to get advanced rulings, all that kind of stuff. The Canadian government's always been really great at putting things easily accessible online. It's been a little more difficult to get that information in Mexico. So I'm hoping USMCA will help companies access that information, which in theory should lead to making it easier to change supply chains. Hopefully it will be beneficial. And I think the goal of the agreement is certainly to make that easier and to bring it within North America. That's certainly one of the goals. As I said, you want to get all the benefits within the happy family that you spent all this time negotiating the rules with. So that's certainly what's behind it. How it will actually work out, I'm not sure, but it seems, as you said, people want to shorten those supply chains. It does seem headed in that direction. So I hope it will be helpful and make it easier for companies to do that.
Great, thank you. And just a question on the new digital chapters. I know we hear, different commentators saying, oh, it really hasn't changed that much. The information that was updated needed to be updated anyway because it didn't reflect the digital economy. So can you speak to us a little bit about that?
It definitely has been updated. You cannot impose any tariffs on good or services that are provided digitally. So that's good. For the most part, that was the way things were happening, but we didn't actually have that in writing as part of the agreement. So it was nice to put it in writing and make sure that is true now. So digital goods that are provided are also duty-free. For the most part, NAFTA doesn't deal with services quite as much as it deals with physical goods. Certainly all the rules of origin apply to physical goods, but a lot of that digital provision stuff is now actually part of the agreement. It wasn't part of NAFTA at all before, but now it's spelled out that any services that are provided or information provided that way is also duty-free. And that's also something that you'll find on trade.gov on that USMCA page, where it kind of breaks out a few of the chapters for more explanation and a few of the industries for more explanation.
Okay, thank you. A question about what happens if the administration or Congress changes later this year. Will we be back to renegotiating this or indeed other trade agreements again?
That is certainly above my pay grade, but it's been enacted. It is the law of the land. I don't think there would be anything preventing a future president from pulling out of it. I think that's possible. My guess is it's unlikely. But right now, at least through the end of this year, I imagine nothing will change, and chances are nothing will change in the future. But just like we renegotiated NAFTA, I suppose that possibility is open to future administrations in any of the three countries, if they feel so. I'm not sure if the USMCA, it does have a sunset agreement. It has to be revisited. And I'd have to look up to see how many years that is. I don't know if Margaret or Natalie knows. I think it might be 5 years. It does kind of have to be, it does have a sunset provision, which NAFTA never did. So.
Yeah, for some reason, 5 years seems to be in my memory.
Does that sound right?
I don't know, from reviewing the literature, maybe.
Yes, yes. I'm sorry that I'm kind of guessing at that, but it should be easy to look up.
Oh, not at all, not at all. So just a reminder, if you do have questions, please pose them in the Q&A. And we do have a bit more specific one here, Meredith. Must all USMCA info fit on one page? Current business product itemized list does not allow this.
I don't think there's any requirement that it fit on one page, no. I mean, you might have 100 products. You would certainly need additional pages. So I haven't seen anything that says that, no.
All right, and I think that concludes our Q&A, unless anybody has any. Oh, I'm seeing one moment. There may be another one here in the chat. Just a second. No. Okay. So if there are no further questions, and we still have a bit of time, so if anybody would like to pose one, please go ahead. But in the interim, I just wanted to draw your attention to the slide there that's up on your screen, Growing Global. This is a save the date, so please remember to save September 25th in your calendars. This is our Growing Global event, of course, which we've been running for many years in a face-to-face situation, and we are delighted and excited to bring you Growing Global online this year. So it'll be the first time that we are endeavoring to bring Growing Global online. It will look a little different, obviously, but for now, please do save the date, September 25th. More details will follow soon and will be hitting your inboxes. And as Meredith and Margaret mentioned previously, we'll also make sure that you get a copy of this presentation. We'll be sending that out to you with a recording of this webinar, and also actually a helpful sheet that the WTCA has developed with those 9 data elements, so that replaces the certificate of origin. So we'll be sending you a guide to that as well. So with that, I will hand you over to Tim for the final word.
Terrific. Thank you, Stella. And most importantly, Meredith, that was terrific. Thank you to you, Natalie, and Margaret, our team. I mentioned it in the opening that we truly in St. Louis have a unique situation. There is not every community around the U.S. that has the support of local through the World Trade Center St. Louis and our terrific team. And if you haven't met Susan Spitz yet, you need to. Susan has spent so much time the last several months working with companies virtually and connecting them to resources. And those resources, as Margaret alluded to, having a U.S. Export Assistance Center here and a team represented, they actually house in normal times in one of our incubators. But then we also have such a great working relationship at the state level, led by Ann Pardalis, the International Trade and Investment Office based out of Jefferson City, and grants and other additional support that is available through their office and the 15 or so international offices that are run by the state of Missouri. This is a wealth of trade and export-related expertise and resources that this community truly does benefit from. So I'm grateful for that. Meredith mentioned, for better or for worse, we may know a little bit more about corn and coal here than we do about wine spritzers, but we are a diverse economy, and we have a tremendous amount of manufacturing and service-related companies that want to go global with their products. And we want to encourage that. We want to support that. And so this team, some of the individuals you heard from here today and others, all stand ready to support you in your work and your interest in doing just that. So thanks again for joining us. And as Stella mentioned, put this date down, September 25th. Join us for Growing Global. It's going to be unlike we've ever experienced here. It is going to be online. It is going to be virtual, but trust me, it is going to be terrific. So put it on your calendar. You'll get more information from us very soon. And Stella, I'll kick it back over to you for the closing of the event.
Great. Just want to thank everyone. Thanks to our terrific speakers, and so delighted to have Natalie join us as well. I know the commercial service team here in St. Louis are excited about her arrival. So we were just delighted that she was able to join us today. And of course, big thanks to Margaret and to Meredith for your participation today. I know you guys are very busy on lots of webinars nationally as well. So we really appreciate you joining us. And to everyone online who joined us as well, thank you for taking time out of your Friday afternoon. We really appreciate it. Stay tuned. We will have another Re-Engage in Trade for you in August. Details are being ironed out. And as Tim said, of course, do not miss Growing Global 2020. Thank you. Bye-bye.